The moon sat high like a cold eye over the Umudike palace yard. Drums beat slow and hard, doom drums, judgment drums. The villagers gathered, faces tight with fear and excitement. In the middle of the circle, 20-year-old Adaora knelt. She was a slave who worked as a maid in the palace. She kept her head up. Her wrists trembled, but her eyes were clear. "I did not seduce the prince," she said, her voice steady. A ripple of talk moved through the crowd. On the platform, King Izudo sat straight, his face tight with worry. Beside him, Queen Mother Kim stood tall, gaze sharp as a blade. "Taboo is not a rumor," the Queen Mother said, her voice ringing like iron. "A slave does not touch the prince. A slave does not share the prince's breath in secret corners. It stains the throne. It calls misfortune." "Banish her!" someone shouted. "Banish her!" More voices answered, bold now that the queen had spoken. Adaora swallowed. She turned her eyes to the king. "My lord," she said softly, "please have mercy on me." The crowd was still insisting that she be banished when a voice cut through the noise like a knife. "Stop this!" It was Prince Obina. He stepped into the light. His eyes were bright with anger and fear. He walked fast, ignoring the guards that reached for him. He got to Adaora, looked at her, bent and touched her shoulder. "Adaora," he said softly, "look at me." She lifted her eyes, tears falling freely. The look she gave him said everything she could not say. Obina turned to the king. "Father," he said, voice low and firm, "I love her. I choose her. She is the one my heart yearns for." Whispers burst like a pot boiling over. The Queen Mother's lips curved, not in joy, in warning. "Love does not wash taboo," she said. "It reveals truth," Obina answered. The king sat quiet for a while. Then he suddenly lifted his staff. At once, the drums went silent. He looked at his son for a long breath. Then he looked at Adaora, the girl who sang while sweeping, who spoke gently to sick children, who carried her work like a prayer. His eyes softened, then hardened again as duty climbed back onto his face. "The law is the law," he said, each word heavy. "If I bend it, the stool I sit on breaks." He ordered that Adaora be banished into the forest. Adaora felt the ground tilt under her knees. She kept her back straight as tears streamed down her cheeks. "Guards?" the Queen Mother said. 2 palace guards stepped forward. One took Adaora by the arm. Another reached for her ankle and snapped the thin copper anklet every slave wore. Then they fixed a single palm front in her mouth. The broken anklet was the sign of banishment and the palm front a sign of rejection. Obina moved to shield her, but 2 other guards blocked him. Spears crossed. "Your Highness," one warned, "do not." "Father," Obina said again. This time the word cracked. "Please." King Izudo did not move. The guards led Adaora across the yard, holding lanterns to light up the way. Women pulled their children back as she passed, as if shame were a fever that could jump. At the palace exit, Adaora turned once. Her eyes found Obina. He shook his head, eyes burning. She was led to the forest entrance and forced to run into the forest. Still crying profusely, she took another step and another. Behind her, Obina fought against the guards like a trapped fire. The Queen Mother did not blink. A child's voice, clear, afraid, rose from the crowd. "Mama, where will she sleep?" "In the forest," the mother whispered. "If the forest lets her." Adaora reached the line where the lantern ended and the deep dark began. She paused, felt the wind, smelled the earth, listened to the whispering leaves. She did not look back again. She entered the dark. "Adaora!" Obina screamed tore the night raw and real. The drums began again, slow, like a heart refusing to stop. 3 months earlier, the prince dropped a bracelet in the mango grove, and a slave with a soft voice picked it up. On that fateful morning, Adaora was returning from the stream carrying a heavy clay water pot balanced neatly on her head. Her wrapper was faded but clean, her voice low as she hummed a tune her mother once sang before her demise, after which she was taken into slavery. Around the same time, Prince Obina was walking the back gardens, restless. As he walked, the leather bracelet on his wrist, a precious gift from his late sister, slipped loose and fell into the grass. He did not notice Adaora, crossing the garden path with her pot of water, spotted the bracelet glinting in the morning light. She set down her pot carefully and picked it up. For a moment, she simply turned it in her hand. Seeing Prince Obiora walking off, she quickly called out, "My lord!" Prince Obina turned. Surprise flickered across his face. Slaves were not meant to call out to him so freely. They had lots of slaves in the palace, but he had never come that close to any. She walked forward, bent slightly, and stretched out her hand. "It fell," she said simply. Obina looked at her properly for the first time. She was very beautiful. Despite her faded wrapper, her eyes carried both weariness and warmth. Their fingers touched as he took the bracelet, and something sharp and new passed between them. "Thank you," he said. Adaora lowered her gaze at once. "It is nothing, my lord." But to Obina, it was not nothing. From that day, the prince found himself straying often toward the places where Adaora worked, sometimes the kitchen, sometimes the laundry yard, sometimes the mango grove. He spoke to her in fragments, brief questions, harmless greetings. But every word they exchanged drew a thread between them, weaving something dangerous. He realized he had fallen in love with her. They began a secret affair, and though Adaora initially resisted, "We cannot, my lord. I am a slave. You are the prince, the law. The law does not know love," he finished. He reached into his robe and pulled out a small coral bead. "Keep this," he whispered, placing it in her palm. "It is a promise. Whatever comes, I will not leave you." Adaora collected the bead. She knew it was wrong, but she couldn't pretend. She had never felt that way for any man. She was just 20 and had never been in any relationship prior to this time. They kept hanging out secretly and eventually made out one night in the prince's inner chamber. It was her first time. Unknown to them, Chiamaka, a fellow maid with an eager hunger for palace favor noticed their every move. She decided to report to the queen, which she did. She lied to the queen that Adaora had seduced Prince Obinna on several occasions until he fell for her. Queen Nkem was very furious. She summoned Adaora immediately and questioned her. Adaora went on her knees and in tears. She couldn't deny the fact that she was in love with the prince. But she denied ever seducing him or making any attempt to do so. This further angered the queen. Umudike Kingdom, like other traditional African kingdoms, had laws meant to preserve order, respect, and the sanctity of the royal bloodline. Among the strictest of them was the law that forbade the royal family from taking a slave or maid as a lover or spouse. To the elders, this rule was not just tradition, it was protection against shame, corruption, and the dilution of royal dignity. The punishment for breaking this law was harsh and left no room for mercy. A slave or maid found guilty of such intimacy with a prince or princess would be stripped of their anklet, the mark of servitude, and cast into the dreaded evil forest, a place spoken of in fearful whispers. There, spirits were said to roam, and few ever returned. In some cases, if the offense was hidden quickly, or the royal in question still held favor, the law allowed for a lesser sentence: permanent banishment from Umudike itself. Such a person would never walk again among the people of the kingdom. In the case of Adaora, the queen insisted on the severe punishment, banishing her into the evil forest. Her reasons best known to her alone. That was why Adaora was banished on that fateful night. As she walked on in the forest, the air grew heavier with every step, thick with the smell of damp leaves and wild earth. Adaora clutched her wrapper tight as the village grew smaller and smaller behind her. Her legs shook so badly she thought they would give way. She wanted to run back, to throw herself at the king's feet, to beg until her voice broke. But she knew the law. Once the anklet was snapped from her ankle, she no longer belonged to the kingdom. Strange sounds echoed around her. Shrieks of night birds, the rustle of unseen animals, and whispers that seemed too human to belong to the wing. She paused, heart hammering, clutching the edge of her wrapper as though it could shield her. Every story she had heard of the forest came alive. Spirits that mimicked the voices of loved ones, rivers that swallowed whole, eyes that glowed where no fire burned. She was really terrified. Tears streamed down her face, hot and endless. She tried to wipe them, but they kept coming until her cheeks stung. Her heart beat like a drum of war. Every step into the forest felt like walking deeper into a grave. "Why me?" she whispered between sobs, her voice breaking into the silence. "What did I do but love?" She fell to her knees, shaking violently. "O God of my mothers, save me! Spirits of this land, have mercy!" Her lips trembled, her words tumbling out in desperation. She pressed her forehead to the cold earth and wept until her body rocked with the force of it. Then she dipped her hand into her inner wrapper and took out a small object. She stared at it in tears. It was the coral bead Prince Obinna had given her, the only memory of him she had left. After a while, she tucked it back into her wrapper. rose unsteadily, and forced herself forward. The deeper she went, the colder the air grew. She had walked for about 1 hour when she felt like someone or something was crawling across her back. She turned suddenly, her eyes wide. That was when she saw them. 2 small lights, eyes, yellow and glowing in the shadows. Adaora froze, every muscle rigid. Her breath stopped. The eyes blinked once. Slowly, they moved closer, tall, higher than a man. She stumbled backwards, her hand clutching at a tree for balance. Then, from above, a sound cut through, the flutter of wings. A white owl swooped low and let out a sharp cry that split the night. The glowing eyes vanished back into the thicket as if the forest itself swallowed them. Adaora collapsed against the tree trunk, shaking uncontrollably. Sobs tore out of her, ragged and loud. She buried her face in her hands and wept like a child abandoned at birth. "Please, I don't want to die here. I don't want to die." Her voice cracked until it was no more than a whisper. The owl perched on a branch above her, watching with calm, steady eyes. It did not move, did not blink, only stared as though it had been sent to see her through. Adaora wiped her tears with trembling fingers, staring back at it. Her voice broke again, barely audible. "Guide me. Please guide me." And so she rose on weak legs, following the faint light of fireflies that had gathered along the path. She walked on, her heart shattered, her spirit trembling, but her feet still moving. That night, Adaora did not sleep. She could not. Every creak of the trees, every strange cry of an animal, every rush of wind that sounded like whispers made her tremble. She sat huddled at the foot of a tree, arms around her knees, rocking as tears soaked her face. The white owl perched above her until dawn, its eyes never leaving her, like a silent guardian. When morning finally broke, she staggered to her feet, weak from fear and exhaustion. Her eyes burned from crying, and her body ached from sleeping against hard roots. Still, she forced herself onward, whispering to herself between sobs, "One more step. Just one more." By midday, she was very hungry and exhausted. Her stomach rumbled so loud she could hear it. Her throat was dry, her lips cracked. She stumbled through the trees, dizzy, her body screaming for food and water. Just when she thought she would collapse and never rise again, she heard the faint sound of running water. Her heart leapt. She followed the sound, pushing through thick undergrowth until she emerged at the bank of a wide river. The water shimmered beneath the sun, clear and alive. Adaora dropped to her knees and scooped it with trembling hands. She drank greedily, gasping between gulps, the coldness stinging her throat, but saving her life. She drank to her satisfaction. Then, as she lifted her head, her eyes caught something unusual. An abandoned hut, leaning crookedly near the riverbank. She froze on the spot, clutching her wrapper tightly as her eyes widened in shock. A hut? Here, in the middle of the dreaded evil forest? It did not make sense. Who could have built it? Was it the dwelling place of a wandering hunter, or something far worse? the home of spirits that mocked the living. Her hands trembled as she took a hesitant step forward. She tiptoed, careful not to make noise, as though the trees themselves might be listening. The hut leaned to one side, its thatch roof half-eaten by time, its mud walls cracked like old skin. Adaura's mind raced. If this is a spirit's house and it finds me here, will I die, or will it claim me as its own? She crept closer and bent slightly, peeping through the open doorway, her breath caught in her throat. Inside, the faint outlines of abandoned things stared back at her. A small basket of worn wrappers and few dressed, a faded mat rolled up against the wall, a broken calabash scattered across the floor. It looked lived in once, but long deserted. Or perhaps, she thought with dread, the spirit that owned it had simply gone out to roam. Adaura's knees weakened. She nearly turned and ran back into the trees, but the river's water still glistened nearby. Her belly still groaned with hunger, and her body screamed for rest. She could not keep wandering forever. Whispering a shaky prayer under her breath, she pressed one foot across the threshold, then another. The air inside the hut was stale, but still nothing moved. No ghostly figure leapt at her. She swallowed hard and let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. For a long time she just stood there, trembling. Then slowly she lowered herself onto the edge of the dusty mat, curling into herself like a frightened child. It was not comfort, but it was shelter. She dozed off immediately and slept for 3 whole hours. When she woke up, she was very hungry. She stepped out of the hut and walked round to see what she could find. Not far from the hut stood a mango tree, its branches heavy with ripe yellow fruit. Beside it, a pawpaw tree bent with swollen green-orange fruit. Adaura stared at them, hardly believing her eyes. She ran to the mango tree first, climbed halfway despite her trembling arms, and plucked 2 ripe ones. Juice ran down her chin as she devoured them hungrily. Then she pulled down a pawpaw, cut it open, and ate until her belly was full. That day, she lay at the hut's doorway, staring at the river with tears running silently. She whispered prayers of thanks, even as fear knotted her heart. Perhaps, just perhaps, the gods had not abandoned her. But when night came, the forest reminded her of where she was. Strange voices floated on the wind, low and hollow, sometimes calling her name. She would sit upright in the hut, heart thudding, clutching her wrapper around her chest. At times, she thought she saw shadows moving just beyond the doorway, figures that vanished when she blinked. Other times, she heard laughter, eerie and broken, weaving through the sound of the river. Each night was a test of courage. She prayed aloud until her throat ached, tears dripping steadily. Gods of our land, do not let them take me. Do not let me die here. Days later, Adaura had settled into a rhythm of survival, drinking and bathing from the river, feeding on mangoes and pawpaws, resting in the hut by day and trembling by night. Her body grew leaner, her skin darker from the sun, but her spirit refused to die. Around the 2nd week, her body began to change. She woke with a sour taste in her mouth, nausea rising like a tide, the smell of pawpaw, once sweet to her, suddenly made her stomach churn. She vomited often, clutching her middle in confusion and fear. At first, she thought it was the river water or a curse from the spirits. But the sickness did not stop. Alone in that empty hut, Adaora sat with her arms wrapped tightly around herself, tears dripping down her cheeks once again. The forest was silent, as though it knew something she did not. And for the first time, a terrifying thought whispered in her mind. Could it be that I carry the prince's child? She broke down on the mat inside the crumbling hut, sobs shaking her thin frame. She whispered into the hollow silence, "Why here, my God? Why now? How will I survive? Alone, with a seed growing in me." Her tears soaked into the dusty mat until it reeked of grief and salt. For days she had avoided the pile of abandoned wrappers and blouses left in the hut, fearing they belonged to spirits. But desperation silenced fear. One morning, she carried them to the river, washed them thoroughly, and spread them on the rocks to dry. She began to rotate them, changing whenever her growing belly pressed too tightly against the old fabric. Adaora soon realized that she had not really come across any wild animal in the forest. She had seen monkeys, birds, and few other harmless animals. She was beginning to wonder if there were no wild animals in the forest until she had a scary encounter with one. It was during one of these river washings. She bent to rinse a wrapper when she heard a low growl behind her. Turning slowly, her eyes locked onto a leopard crouched among the bushes, its yellow eyes glowing, muscles coiled. Adaora's breath caught. Her knees threatened to give way. She did not dare scream. Even her tears froze. Instinct took over. She grabbed the wet wrapper from the river, flung it hard toward the animal, and dashed into the hut. Her legs flew faster than her fear. The leopard leapt, but got tangled briefly in the cloth, its claws slashing the ground where she had stood. Adaora slammed the hut's doorframe with her body, trembling uncontrollably. The beast circled outside, growling, before retreating into the bush. That night, she cried herself to sleep, clutching her belly. A few days later, hunger drove her back to the mango tree near the hut. She reached for a ripe fruit, her mind dulled by fatigue. Then she stopped suddenly. A long, thick serpent slid down the branch above her head, its black scales glistening in the sunlight. Adaora's scream tore through the forest. She stumbled back, falling onto the ground. The serpent hissed and swayed, its tongue flicking the air. She grabbed a fallen branch and hurled it at the snake with all her strength. The creature recoiled into the tree, disappearing among the leaves. Shaking, Adaora crawled backward until her back hit the hut wall. She wrapped her arms around herself and rocked, muttering prayers, her lips dry and trembling. After that day, life continued. Adaora drank from the river, plucked pawpaw and mango to fill her belly, and used the hut as her frail refuge. Yet, with each passing day, her body betrayed her more. The sickness returned every morning, her steps slowed, and the small roundness at her belly grew firmer. One evening, sitting by the doorway, she pressed her palm against the swell and whispered through tears, "So it is true. You are here. You are his Obinna's child. But how will I keep you alive in this place? How will I give you a life when mine is already over? Back in Umudike, life had never been the same for Prince Obinna. Since the night Adaora was led through the palace gates and cast into the evil forest, the once lively heir who filled the palace gardens with laughter now walked like a shadow among walls that felt more like a prison than a home. Obinna shut himself away most of the time, locking his chambers from within. Servants would knock gently with trays of steaming yam porridge or spiced goat stew, but he never opened the door. On some days, the food remained untouched until it grew cold and was taken away. His clothes hung loose on him, his eyes sunken with sleepless nights. He sat for hours at the carved window of his chamber, staring at the distant forest as though he could will it to release Adaora back to him. At night, he lay awake whispering her name, clutching the bracelet she had once returned to him in the garden. His mother, Queen Mother Nkam, could not bear the sight of her son wasting away. She entered his chamber one morning, her jewels clicking softly, her face softer than usual. She sat beside him, placing her hand on his shoulder. "Obinna," she said, her voice unusually tender, "you must eat, you must live. Do not let a foolish girl steal your strength. A prince does not mourn a slave." But Obinna pulled away from her touch. His eyes, red from nights of grief, blazed with quiet defiance. "She is not foolish, she is not nothing. And if you think banishment can erase her from my heart, then you do not know your own son." I, the Queen Mother stiffened, anger flashing, but she swallowed it. "You will marry when the time comes," she said coldly. "The kingdom cannot wait forever." Obinna turned his face back toward the window. "Then let the kingdom wait until the moon falls. I will never marry another, never." King Ezeudo tried next. He summoned Obinna to the throne room, hoping a father's counsel might reach where a mother's scolding had failed. "My son," the king began, his voice firm but gentle. "A prince carries the weight of his people, not just his own heart. I know you are hurting, but you must rise, eat, laugh, live. The kingdom looks to you." Obinna bowed his head, his hands clenched at his sides. "Father, you have always taught me that a king must be truthful. Should I then live a lie? Should I smile while my heart is ashes? Should I marry another woman and pretend that I do not love Adaora?" "Your love for her cannot change the law," the king said quietly. "Then let me remain unmarried until the day I die," Obinna answered, his voice breaking. "If I cannot have her, I will have no one." The king's face fell with sorrow. He had hoped time would soften his son's grief, but instead it seemed to grow sharper, cutting deeper into his soul. From that day, the palace lived under a shadow. The Queen Mother whispered to the council about finding him a bride by force. The king walked the halls, heavy with worry, and the prince, locked in his chambers, fed his sorrow with silence and his stubborn vow that no woman but Adaora would ever be his wife. Back in the forest, Adaora's belly was growing round and firm, a constant reminder that she was no longer alone in her suffering. The mornings were the hardest, her body heavy, her stomach twisting with nausea. But each day, she forced herself to rise. She fetched water from the river, plucked pawpaws and mangoes, and whispered prayers to her unborn child. The hut had become her fragile refuge. But the forest was still alive, with mysteries that never let her rest. Strange cries at night, eerie laughter that drifted in from nowhere, and shadows that moved even when the trees were still. Yet, in the light of day, she sometimes dared to step out and walk around the hut, convincing herself she must not allow fear to keep her chained. On one such afternoon, Adaora wandered slowly around the edge of the hut, her palm resting protectively over her protruding tummy. Her bare feet brushed the soft grass as she drew courage from the warm sun. She whispered prayers under her breath, asking the gods to keep her child safe as she walked. Then, suddenly, she stopped in her track. Just a short distance away, by a thicket of bushes, a woman was bending low, plucking leaves into a woven basket. From the back, she looked almost ordinary, her wrapper faded but neat, her hair tied in a bun. For a moment, Adaora's heart leapt. Could it be? Another human in this cursed place? Someone like me? But just as quickly, fear gripped her. What if she's not human? What if she's one of the spirits in disguise? Adaora's body stiffened, her breath caught in her throat. She wanted to turn and run, but her legs refused to move. The woman rose slowly to her feet, still facing away. Then, without warning, she turned. Adaora's scream caught in her chest. Where a human face should have been, two eyes burned like fire, glowing and crackling as they locked on her. The woman said nothing, only stared, and in that stare, Adaora felt her very soul tremble. With a terrified cry, Adaora spun around and fled. Her legs carried her faster than she thought possible. Her arms clutched around her belly to shield her child from the force of her run. Branches scratched her arms. Her wrapper snagged on thorns, but she did not stop. Her scream echoed through the trees as she burst back into the clearing where her hut stood. She stumbled inside, slammed the creaking door shut, and pushed the wooden bar across it with trembling hands. Her chest heaved, her heart pounded like a drum of war. She collapsed onto the floor, gasping for air, tears pouring down her cheeks. Her palms pressed hard over her belly as if to protect the little life growing within. "Oh, gods of the land!" she cried out, her voice breaking. "Watch over me! Keep me safe. Keep my child safe. Do not let the spirits take me." The hut walls shook with her sobs. Outside, in the distance, a laugh, low and haunting, floated across the trees. Adaora buried her face into the mat, whispering prayer after prayer, until exhaustion pulled her into a restless sleep. And thus ended the first part of her journey, alone, terrified, but still alive, with only her faith and her unborn child as her shield in the evil forest. Dear viewers, life is full of mysteries, some so terrifying they defy reason. When fear comes uninvited, may God give us strength to endure, courage to keep moving, and faith that no darkness lasts forever. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned for more. Watch out for part 2.